Hello everybody and welcome. When people talk about buffing weapons, the biggest concern is always power creep. It is incredibly difficult to balance weapons whilst also not raising the ceiling or lowering the floor. We can all agree that Bungie at times isn't the best at balancing, so I'm going to talk about 10 exotic weapon buffs / reworks that I would like to see in Destiny 2. First up, we have Rat King. This has been a meme since the Red War, and whilst it's not bad for 6-player use, it is simply outclassed by Touch of Malice and Outbreak Perfected. Both of them are primary weapon boss damage, but neither are very good close range. So this is the niche that I'm trying to put this gun in. Most of my balancing isn't making something incredibly amazing at all things, but putting them in niches that make them used, if only for a brief period of time. Rat King's exotic perk is Rat Pack, which says this fully automatic weapon becomes stronger when nearby allies also have it equipped. Stacks up to 6 times. The identity of this gun is super interesting, so I would keep that the same. Essentially, I would have the 6-time perk do 50% more damage than it does now, and for that to scale up through the stacks. So 2 times would be 10% more than it does now, 3 times would be 20% more, and so on. This means that it will only be really useful for close range. In addition, I'd make the recoil get really unpredictable, kind of like this. This should make the weapon really good for close primary damage situations while not encroaching on long range scenarios, which Touch of Malice is king in. Next, we have Crimson, and Crimson's main issue is its catalyst. It's literally useless. Well, for PvE it is. I'm focusing this list on PvE. I'll try not to make PvP too unrealistic. Our main goal is to make these weapons more viable in PvE. The current catalyst increases range by 18, so I just slap that onto the already existing weapon. I would give the catalyst essentially an entire new perk on the weapon. We all know that this gun has a knife on the end of it, so why not use it? The new perk would read, getting 3 or more precision kills in a single mag gives the weapon a charge of thrash, which allowed the user to, thrash out with the weapon and hit enemies in a radius in front of them. For reference, this would be about as much damage as the glaive hit. One thing I normally hate about abilities in Destiny 2 is that they feel so clunky. It's often better to just shoot enemies and try to hit them with some random perk and whatever. So I would give this attack a 0.2 second upstart time, a 0.2 second cooldown time, and the attack itself would take 0.3 seconds, making this entire animation about 0.7 seconds. This should make it feel snappy and actually useful. To balance it, the range would be bad, essentially low melee distance. Plus, it wouldn't track, meaning the user would have to essentially be on top of the enemy to use it. This should allow for a super aggressive playstyle with the weapon. It would also stack with Cruel Remedy, meaning these melee attacks would heal you on kills. Summoning the weapon will also get rid of the perk, meaning you can't just store charges and switch to it for a 1-2 combo. Also for quality of life, I'd give this weapon full auto trigger. These next changes are simple, and they are to Forerunner and Eriana's Vow. I would give Forerunner intrinsic anti-barrier. I don't see why it doesn't already. It's essentially the Eriana's Vow of sidearms, so just give it anti-barrier. Make it 3-tap barriers in GMs, and for Eriana's, make it 1-tap when Looks Can Kill is activated. Back to Forerunner, the catalyst is useless. I decrease the time needed to make the grenade, and then turn it into a blinding explosion, which would be much better for overall PvE activities. Next up, we have Fighting Lion, a weapon that I really wish had more effect on the meta. It's such a cool weapon, and I'd like to change it. If you don't already know, this is a primary ammo handheld grenade launcher. Its exotic perk is, well, the fact that it's a handheld grenade launcher, and its actual perk is that direct hits deal more damage to shields, dealing damage increases reload speed, and rapid final blows against grenade damage combatants refill the magazine. My change would have it focus on that last line of its trait and make it a good supporting weapon. I would make the catalyst the exotic perk, which, if you don't know, says that after firing the weapon, all kinetic and power weapons receive a 3-second boost to accuracy and handling. And it also changed this slightly, making it so the timer was increased to 5 seconds, and it also gave a stackable 25% bonus to reload. Now to the trait. I make it so direct hits did 50% more damage flat out and get rid of the second and third line. To replace them, I'd make it so the weapon's grenades cause enemies that are in the blast radius to become volatile, but only direct hits would do damage. Then I'd give it 2 more things. Direct hits give this weapon 100% more handling for a brief period of time, and killing volatile targets reloads Fighting Lion when stowed. This would essentially make Fighting Lion a quick swap weapon that would be used to prime a group of enemies to be quickly finished off with a second weapon. Also, it would be very good for hot swapping for bait and switch and for that reload bonus. Tarrabah is already really good in PvP, so making any changes is pretty difficult. So I'm going to make two simple changes. First, giving this weapon a catalyst that grants target locked, and second, have crits increase Ravenous Beast time, not damage. This will make it less oppressive in neutral game, but more consistent if you're good at it. As it stands, even if you're doing constant damage, the timer decreases since you have to reload. So I'd make it that if you're getting constant precision hits, the timer stays flat even when considering the reload speed. These changes should give it strong effectiveness against both bosses and mages. This change would either do nothing or make it busted. I'm not sure which one. Next we have the most forgotten weapon of all time, which is Ruinous Effigy. This is such a weird weapon. I've seen no one use it since its release. You've forgotten what it does, and I wouldn't blame if you had. Kills with this weapon create these little spheres which you can use to attack with. They can suppress enemies, and they do pretty lackluster damage. To start, I would increase the damage of their abilities by just 10% each. This change would make Ruinous slightly more viable in the neutral game. The real change would be granting the heavy attack the ability to apply a 50% debuff for 3 seconds. This should make it viable for short boss phases and low man content without having to sacrifice your heavy for tractor cannon. It would also be very good in GMs, but the trade-off will be very high vulnerability with the attack. This will probably replace Tractor for instances such as Atrax, Shirochi, and other short-term damage phases, but overall wouldn't be as good as Tractor. Again, I'm trying to make niches here. The only issue I can see with this is the fact that currently Rapid Fire Ranger can buff the time of debuffs, so increase the timer indefinitely, meaning you could have a permanent 50% debuff. I'm assuming that with this change, this glitch isn't in the game, but as it is, this would be too OP. Now we have Borealis, the worst of a bad class of weapons. This weapon's got a small, and when I say small, I mean really small, buff recently, but it was useless. So here's a buff that might make it insane or not change it much at all. Similarly to a lot of other old school catalysts, it simply gives a small stat boost to reload speed. I'm just going to add that to the gun and replace it with a new perk called Sublimation, which reads, dealing damage with each element in a brief period of time supercharges the weapon. Activating this would reload the mag, increase damage by 300%, and increase reload speed by 100% for 10 seconds. This might be overkill, but to be honest, I don't think so due to the already slow fire rate and the fact that you have to shoot 3 different elements. I think this would actually be pretty balanced. That change is only really effective for champs and bosses, so to increase its neutral game abilities, each element gains a new perk. Solar spreads Scorch to nearby targets, Precision kills with Void spread Volatile to nearby targets, and Precision kills with Arc create a blinding explosion. Also give it intrinsic anti-barrier. Even with these changes, I doubt the weapon will become used due to snipers still being bad, but assuming they did become good in the future, this would become a good weapon. Truth has been power crept more than any other weapon in the game in my opinion. It serves literally zero purpose. So here we are to revamp it. I want to replace horseshoes and hand grenades, or whatever that perk is called, with the prototype True Seeker and make an intrinsic perk called Delayed Reaction. Essentially for every 0.5 seconds a rocket is in the air, it does 20% more damage. This would turn the weapon placed out into essentially shooting shots in the air and trying to make it take as long as possible to hit the target. This would only really work in open air areas and would be very situational. Hopefully this would make it so there was one boss that had a cheese strat that made it slightly useful, but other than that it should stay unused. Now we have Worldline Zero, and ever since Eager Edge was introduced, this weapon lost essentially all value. So why not bring it back? I would replace Assassin's Blade with Eager Edge, then I'd rework the exotic perk. I'd make this attack chain lightning to everything around it, and then make lightning strikes at each location. This would essentially just be a better Eager Edge sword, except it's exotic. This should make the weapon slightly more viable for movement and fun to mess around with. And finally, we have Whisper of the Worm. This change is pretty simple, and I think it's probably the most likely that Bungie would do. Essentially, you have two things. First, I would revert the change they made to this weapon, except I would have a twist. If you hit 3 crits, it brings ammo from thin air. reloading your weapon like it was before. But I give this weapon 2 extra things. First, I'd increase the damage of White Nail by 10%, and I turn this weapon's reserves to 0. If you miss a crit, then you have no ammo. I don't know if this would be a good change, but it would increase the skill gap of the weapon, and with the damage increase, maybe make it slightly more viable, especially for bosses like orcs with super long damage phases and large crits. That's it. A couple of changes to make some exotic weapons better / different. Most of these changes are impossible for Bungie to implement, as if they would in the first place, but it's still fun to think about these things. If you enjoyed, leave a like and share to Bungie. Make them give Forerunner anti-barrier, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.